Hello, film nerds, and welcome back to Blockbuster Card, a new show from Osiris Media and Library Card Productions. I'm Brian Brinkman, and I'm joined, as always, by Megan. No RJ once again, sadly. Megan is a city dwelling by day, mountain house queen by night, who has never once sunk a septic tank uphill in order to shave off some costs and screw over the locals in Western Mass. Megan, how are we doing here today?
I'm doing good, and I'm actually in the mountains while we're recording today, so it's perfect. I've got the vibe, I've got the woods surrounding me, the bird song. I'm really having the feelings for this movie today.
Have you ever chopped wood?
Yes, I've tried. It's really
Tried.
hard. Yeah, we
Harder
have
than it
like
looks.
it's so much harder than it looks. It looks very organic and it's not. And I tried because we have like trees that fall down all the time and we have to clear them and we do like we have a big fireplace and so we'll have big fires in the winter and so we go through a lot of wood and so we do need to chop wood, but it is a real skill and it's also takes it's one of those repetitive motions that you have to do a lot of times to become good at it.
A lot of focus, but also just let the axe handle slide down your arms and everything will be okay. You'll be able to chop it. So you were in the right vibes for this. I was just in the right vibes for this. We're going to get into the movie we're talking about here. We're still in the prelude segment of the pod. So for any of you who are new here to Blockbuster Card, we are avid film fans. We are constantly talking about movies, directors, great performances, and whether or not a film quote unquote works in our private text threads. So we figured let's bring those conversations to life here for you all. This is our third episode of Blockbuster Card, and in today's episode, we are discussing Raisuku's Hamaguchi's. Forgive me if my Japanese is a little bit stale at this point. 2024 Eco Gentrification Meditation on Our Times, a movie called Evil Does Not Exist. This is the follow up to his Academy Award winning film, Drive My Car. It's a fascinating, beautiful, and ultimately devastating look at what happens when a trendy glamping company comes to a small rural community in Japan with aspirations to build a semi permanent camping site, but are rebuked by the community when it becomes clear that they haven't done any research to determine the impact of their business on the community. Meg, I watched this movie as I was coming out of a pretty serious film drought last fall, and it reawakened in me everything I love about and look for in movies. I am so excited to dive into this discussion today. But first, I have to know, what was the last great movie that you saw?
Well, I just finished it yesterday and it's a movie I've seen before, but sometimes you just have to go back to what you love. And this movie is a movie that came out in 1995. It's directed by Richard Linklater, and it's Before Sunrise, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. But if you haven't seen it in a while, you should watch it. If a movie could be my religion, Brian, this would be it for me. This would be it for me. This movie is just, it's about two people that meet on a train on their way. One's going to Paris, one's going to Vienna, and Ethan Hawke is the male character, and he asks Julie Delpy, the woman, to get off the train with him and spend the night in Vienna while he waits for his flight back to America. It is deeply, deeply romantic, and it's focused on that kind of organic, authentic connection between two people that occurs at like a really unlikely time and place. And to me, it's just really about the beauty and the magic of connection between two people. It also has incredible acting. It's got that effortless natural chemistry between the two of them. It's got great writing. It's a beautiful setting. It's a fantastic movie. I know you've seen it, right?
I've seen it. I've done all three in the trilogy. I actually have them on cue because the Big Leagues podcast, the Big
Yeah,
Leagues movie podcast, the Big Picture, huge inspiration for this show. Sean and Amanda, if you ever want to come on and hash it out, we're happy to chat movies with you guys.
please.
They are currently going through their top 25 favorite movies of the century so far. And Before Sunset, the second of three movies in that trilogy, was on their list. And so I have to go back now and rewatch all of them. I remember obviously the romanticism, the European, just kind of the vibe of like walking through a European city while you're falling in love out of nowhere. But the focus on dialogue in those movies was always a huge thing for me. That is the drivers for that. So I will actually be watching those most likely over the next week because sneak preview, the movie we will be talking about next week is actually a foundational movie for appreciating before sunrise, sunset, and midnight, which is called Brief Encounter, which we'll talk about more towards the end of this episode and as we plan for next week. So before sunrise, amazing movie. I can the vibes you get after watching those movies. Only 90 minutes, all
It's
dialogue,
perfect.
all emotion, just the best.
It's so fast too, the way that they talk over each other, it's very Mamet-like, it's just everything I want in a movie, and I'm gonna watch Before Sunset, I think probably
That's the
tonight.
next one.
Yep.
There we go. There
Yeah,
we
I've
go.
seen it, but I don't remember it as well as the first one. The first one is just so memorable and perfect, but I'm excited to see this one again because I don't remember it very much.
My recollection of all three is that it's an amazing accomplishment that they were able to sustain the feelings and the vibe of the first one across the latter two. Usually
Mm,
that doesn't happen. You make a sequel and you have to add all these things. But Richard Linklater, his ongoing project seems to be about time and how time changes us and doesn't change us. And so he does a
yeah.
really great way of rooting the stories still in where the magic of the original was. Um, well, more on those. The last great movie I saw was actually a new movie, the Phoenician Scheme, the new Wes Anderson flick. I was in Portland, Oregon over the weekend. I used to live in Portland. It was my first time back since I left Portland. Um, and on Saturday, we had no plans. And it rained all day, which
Of
is
course.
wont to do in Portland. And I said, you know what? We used to go to the Hollywood Theater all the time when we lived off of Sandy Boulevard. And why don't we go see what is playing? Lo and behold, the Phoenician Scheme was playing there. I'd been wanting to see it. Wes Anderson movies are kind of appointment viewing for me. And this was a great movie. This is a great, I got nothing to do this evening or this afternoon, and I want something to take up my time for 100 minutes that is enjoyable in a group with other people. I'd like to get some popcorn while at it. This is the perfect movie for that. This is the type of movie that they should be making 10, 20, 30 times over each year because it will keep the industry afloat. This is not my favorite Wes Anderson by any means. Um, I would say it's probably middle tier kind of for me with stuff like Moonrise Kingdom, Grand Budapest, Life Aquatic. My favorites are uh, Royal Tenenbaums, Darjeeling Limited, and Asteroid City, but this gets to exactly what you want from Wes. Every scene is perfectly set. The colors are immaculate. The dialogue is just like right there, super sharp, incredibly funny stuff. I laughed so hard throughout this movie. Benicio del Toro was fantastic and did a great job of seamlessly fitting into the Wes Anderson universe. Tom Hanks and Bryan Cranston were both hysterical in cameos throughout the movie. And the real star of the movie, which I did not anticipate going into it, was Michael Cera. I am Michael Cera is kind of one of those typecasted people. He's always the awkward dork in Arrested Development, Superbad, Juno in my mind, and then it kind of stops at that point, and I really just didn't care for where he went. After that, it seemed like he was Michael Cera acting as Michael Cera in a Michael Cera production, directed by Michael Cera, written by Michael Cera. You know that whole vibe.
Yeah.
You kind of get that nowadays with like Kieran Culkin. Um, he lived so fully in this role. He created this accent that was fully believable. The awkwardness of him met with this kind of charm, and it just added so much to the movie. So I cannot recommend going and see it enough. It is a great movie. It's hard for Wes Anderson to strike out in my mind. And if you're just looking to get to the theaters, if you're like, hey, I talked to so many people who are like, I don't know, the last time I was at the movie theater, and I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. Movies aren't that expensive, and it's pretty easy to figure out what's going on with the internet. You got great Local theaters, if you're living near a city, or your big box cinemas, tend to have at least 9 to 10 movies that are playing on a given basis. This will definitely be at a big box. Go and check it out. The Phoenician Scheme. It is just really enjoyable stuff here in 2025.
I always love Wes Anderson films. If nothing else, I just like looking at them. But I have to
Yes.
revisit Darjeeling Limited and Asteroid City because they didn't stick with me, and I don't think I was paying attention enough, but I love Moonrise Kingdom, and Tannenbaums is one of my
Mm.
favorites, but I love Moonrise Kingdom. I think it's so sweet.
I thought it was really sweet. I enjoyed it. I kind of felt similar to this, where I walked away just being happy I saw it and didn't feel much.
Yeah.
Um, Darjeeling mixes sibling rivalries with travel across India with the Kinks, Lola versus the Power Man, and the Money Go Round, which is a top 5 album for me, all in a way that just like completely obliterated me. And every time I see it, I get something more out of it. Asteroid City, as a father of young kids with you know pretty severe health issues within our family, it just like completely like rocked my world. I absolutely loved that movie. This one was good. This is like Wes Anderson can barely do wrong, and this proves he can barely do wrong. So I highly recommend people checking it out. Um, okay, so there's 2 movies for you all to check out in addition to what we're talking about today. Today's conversation is about Evil Does Not Exist. Evil Does Not Exist follows widower Takumi, who lives with his 8-year-old daughter, Hannah, in the peaceful Japanese mountain village of Mitsubiki. He chops wood, he smokes cigarettes, he collects jugs of water from the forest stream, and he lives a peaceful life close to Earth. This movie spends a lot of time in silence, highlighting the relationship between man and nature and how this small community lives off the land. The movie shifts during a 20-minute scene built around a community meeting between residents and the PR heads of a glamping company from Tokyo, who are presenting plans to put a glamping site in their community. Quick question, Meg. Have you ever been glamping?
Oh, yes, many
Mm,
times.
mm.
Many
I have not
times.
been glamping. I have not.
It's
I've been.
so fun. So the first time I ever went was in England, actually,
Mm,
and we have a bunch of families when we were living over there that we were friends with. We all had really young kids, and we wanted to go away somewhere, but, it's very expensive to take tons of people to hotels, and so we found these campsites. This is kind of before I knew what glamping was. This is, 10, 12 years ago, and they had these glamping setups on, like, farms in the English countryside. And so
mm.
you would go and we would get all 5 tents. They were kind of tents. They're big tents with floors and, like, a little fireplace in them, and one of those, like, wood burning stoves, not really a fireplace. Those, like, stoves you can, like, put a tea kettle on and, but real fire. And we would go in May, and it would always be freezing and raining, and it was just very wholesome. We would, like, ride bikes to the pub and drink beers, and the kids could all pile in the bikes, and we would, hang out with the sheep and the chickens, and it was just a very fun way to vacation with lots of families in a way that wasn't crazy expensive. So, we did it a bunch when we were there. It's really fun, and I've done it here in the Catskills as well too, and it's a really great way you can bring your dog on trips, and if you like to just be outside, it's really nice.
It does sound ideal.
Mhm.
This movie questions
Yeah.
the relationship between idealism from an urban setting and nature. So this movie, it moves through this, like I said, it's a 20-minute scene. It goes from like 30 minutes in the movie into like 55 minutes. Two of the developer representatives, Takahashi and Mayuzumi, introduce the project. However, the townsfolk unanimously voiced their serious concerns about the consequences the site will have on their delicate water system and scoff at the public relations tactics. The main character, Takumi, and others tell them that the septic tank capacity is not large enough for the planned development and that sewage will leak into the groundwater that they tap from wells. The movie shifts again as Takahashi and Mayuzumi change their attitudes as they listen, but after reporting the outcome of the meeting to their boss, they are rebuffed and told not to change the septic system, but instead seduce Takumi with gifts and hire him as the caretaker for the camp. The pair then drive back to the village. as they chat about their online dating experiences, their disillusionment with their jobs, where they're at in life. And they have kind of this reawakening. They chop wood and have lunch with Takumi. And here, Takahashi, he undergoes an awakening during this period and decides to stay in the village to live there and learn all he can from Takumi. I'm going to pause on where the conclusion is because the last 5 minutes of this movie add a lot to where the movie is at, but this kind of leads us up towards that period in time, and that we're introduced to this community, we're introduced to this main character, we're introduced to kind of the relationship that this community has to nature, and then we're introduced to this immediate conflict where this idea of a glamping site, which is going to be a retreat of sorts for urban middle-aged folks and younger folks who want to get away into nature but still have some of the creature comforts of home, and what that will ultimately do to the natural setting. So Meg, as we kind of dive into this, give me two things. First, your kind of general takeaways from this movie from a pacing standpoint, from a filming standpoint, but then also give me a scene that really stood out to you and kind of is emblematic of the movie as a whole to you.
I learned a lot about this movie when I was reading about it after watching it twice when I was getting ready for this, because this movie was actually written based on music, and not necessarily a piece of music, but the director works a lot with this certain composer. Her name is Aiko Ishibashi, and she scored Drive My Car as well. And she came to him with the idea of making a movie that kind of would accompany her music. And he didn't want to make something abstract. He wanted to make something narrative, and she was cool with that. And hearing about their process was fascinating to me. It was a really organic, creative, collaborative project. So he listened to about 3 pieces of music that she had written, and then he went to where she writes her music, and where she lives and writes her music and works is very similar to and very close to where they shot this movie, and so she's surrounded by nature, and so he actually just started kind of immersing himself there. He spent time there talking to locals, and the story actually came kind of organically out of that, and then he actually was at one of these town meetings where this exact thing was happening, and so the story and the whole movie really came from this collaboration, which I think is just really incredibly beautiful and also very unique, because I think usually it's the opposite way around, right? Like a person would direct a movie and make a movie, and then the composer would write music for it after. So I found that really exciting and really interesting. To me, the pace of the movie is pretty slow. The first time I watched it, I had to kind of reframe. It's one of those things when you watch a movie this slow that you have to force yourself to not look at your phone, and,
Mhm.
you have to remind yourself that it's okay to exist in this slow of a pace, I think, which is really it's, like, refreshing. It's like taking a bath or something. It's really good for you and good for your brain. So that was a stretch for me, but the pacing of it is so intentional, and I think we'll get into why as we talk more about it. But I think the biggest takeaway for me with this film as far as a scene, I have 2 I wanna talk about, but the first thing I just wanna talk about is just the forest in general. To me, it's a huge character in the film and just such an important part of the film. It's gonna stay with me for a long time. The movie starts out walking through the forest and looking up through, at the trees, and as someone who loves to spend a lot of time in the forest and spent a lot of time in the forest as a kid playing, have so many really evocative memories of laying down, looking up at the trees like that, and it's a really beautiful way to start the film, and it has this there's music playing, and then the music stops, and you hear the little girl Hannah breathing, and you realize that it's her that's walking and looking up, and I think there's such an interesting thing that he does with his cinematography in this way of making the camera not always from someone's perspective, but also from its own perspective, and the forest seems to have a perspective in this film. I don't know if that struck you when you were watching the movie?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing about the forest as a character is a really great insight because one thing that this movie accomplishes that I think is often challenging in modern movies is to really showcase nature and the power of nature without coming across as though you're on a soapbox, without coming across in a melodramatic fashion. I think so often movies are made about how important and essential nature is, and then they ultimately have this great message that has to be said and rehashed over and over and over again. And one of the things I love about this movie is that you, as the viewer, are just required to, sit there and absorb the way that these people live, the closeness that these people have to nature, the focus that they must have on really every second of every day to survive in the elements here and to be able to live among nature. And you ultimately get this, real sense while watching this that nature is really unforgiving. It's really powerful, and it also doesn't really give a shit about your sentimentalities about it. And it's something that happens throughout the overall movie is that you start to realize um, the characters who develop sentiments and even regrets about the lack of time that they spend in nature. They don't really, there's no moment where, the natural environment then says, okay, cool, now it's going to be easy for you to live your life. It's kind of a struggle for everyone to live there. And you see this in the way that Takumi moves through the world. He moves so slowly and so um uh there's a real deliberateness to the way that he moves on a day-to-day basis. And um there's a constant list you can kind of see going on in his head of what he needs to do to survive, and that pace he is fully accepted for both what it gives him, which is this extremely natural experience within the modern world, but also what does it take away, which is wealth and excitement and his entire life is close to the earth in this sort of way. And I think that the way that they shoot nature throughout this and the way that they shoot the forest throughout this is really this sense that wherever you look, it's always there and it's always around you. And it's kind of these impenetrable walls that when you're in this village, sure, there's a school, there are markets, there's a community center, there are relatively nice looking homes that have been hand built and handcrafted by a lot of these people, and they look to live relatively comfortable lives. But all of that, whereas like where I live right now in the suburbs up against the mountains only really impact and the prairie only really impacts my life based on what the weather is. But beyond that, I can get inside and I don't have to like do additional work outside to like keep the heat on, to keep the lights on. Everything that these people do on a day-to-day basis um has to be, one with nature. They have to work with what they're given. And that sense of, there's a shot towards the end of the movie of a character on a patio, and you see the sun setting behind the trees, and you really get that sense of like when you're camping and the sun sets, and you really realize how dark and immersive the natural world is, and how it's all around you when you're in kind of a remote environment. That is just that was mind blowing stuff.
Yeah, there's such an interesting kind of dichotomy that is presented with the nature here because it feels very it provides a lot of solace and comfort, it feels like to him, especially because he's lost his wife and there's this sense of loss in the house, but there's also this beauty and comfort that he gets from being outside and from being in this beautiful environment and taking these long walks with his daughter. And then there's also when she goes missing later, this sense that so many things could have happened to her outside. And so there's this feeling of like danger and also unknowingness, and I think he balances that so well in this film, just the mystery of the natural world and the reliability of it, and also kind of its abundance to give. I think how she keeps discovering the feathers and this feeling of, like, getting something from the natural world that was left, that you can bring back, and then she gives it to the older man as a gift, and it's something that he treasures, and there's just this sense of of beauty and of abundance from the natural world that's really beautiful and comes through really strongly in the film.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, from a scene standpoint, I think the easiest place to start is what I think is the best scene of the film, and one of the best scenes I think I've ever watched in cinema, which is the community meeting where
It's
they're being
amazing.
presented, where they're being presented the ideas for the glamping site, and you get this real you get a lot of things all in once. One of which is the cultural differences between people living in a rural environment versus people coming from an urban environment. Another is this kind of respect for nature, that really comes across in terms of all of the things that the citizens of this community are thinking of that may impact the community based off of the glamping site that's going in. Everything from who will, ensure that there are no campfires because this area is susceptible to forest fires, to, you know, there's this back and forth exchange of the septic tank that is going to be put in is conducive for like 55 to 65% capacity, but as a business they're hoping to reach 100% capacity, but they don't expect 100% capacity to be at all times, and so they're, you know, anticipating somewhere between like a floating 50 to 70% full capacity. But you don't need to worry about that because, five people's uh, um, 5 people worth of sewage on a weekly, monthly basis in your water won't actually impact it. And you just get these like back and forth discussions where the people in the community have clearly thought, what do we need to do to not impact nature so that it works for us, so that we can preserve it, so we can live here for a long period in time. And the people from this company shortly after COVID have uh, um, government subsidies to spend. They are going to expire. They need to do this to make a little bit of extra money for the company. How do we get this taken care of as quickly as possible, while not pissing off too many people? Maybe a couple, but not too many people on a local level, so that we can be in a position where we start to see revenue come in relatively quickly. There's just a lot of like back and forth between the community where you understand, if you have to live in this environment, if you choose to live in this environment, there's a lot of sacrifice that comes with that. And that's not to say that there's not a lot of sacrifice that comes with an urban dwelling. You start to understand that from the perspectives of the two people coming from the glamping company, that they even see the challenges of living in urban life, that they want to ultimately put themselves in a position where they have the perception of peace that these people in rural America or rural Japan have. um, I was really struck. I just did a pretty big camping trip a couple weeks ago, in western Montana with a couple close friends of mine, and I live here in Denver. I definitely don't go camping as much as I should. I still hike pretty frequently. I still ski, fish, but I don't go camping as much as I used to. And part of that is small kids. Part of it's just my fault getting, locked into kind of my own schedules, my own norms. But I went with two of my friends, or three of my friends, excuse me, two of which are pretty expert level campers. Like they know how to live. They could survive for, I mean, months on end in a very rural environment. I would have zero doubts of their survival skills. And it was wild to me to feel the whole weekend I was camping with them that I had to kind of accept I don't know anything and I need to learn as much from you guys. Um, Everything from, and I know how to pack it in, pack it out, but like, just how do we organize this sort of stuff? How do we put ourselves in a position where we keep as clean of a site as possible because there are bears in the area? How do we cook without overusing ingredients? How do we know, what water we can use? How do we know, just various things throughout the weekend that I felt like I was completely out of my comfort zone. And also felt really, in this kind of elevated sense of, connection to the natural world, but also realizing because we got hit with a really huge storm one night. Um, it was really cold up in the mountains. We chopped a bunch of wood to build a fire. Like the things I can do in a very casual manner in my backyard when I want to build a fire versus what I have to do hour by hour, minute by minute to make sure that we're able to have a sustainable fire in the mountains. Just a completely different way of thinking. And it really kind of reset my brain in a lot of ways, made me rethink a lot about, just my day to day. And you see that in this movie as well. You really see in this movie the relationship that people in the community have to nature versus the relationship that the representatives from the glamping company have coming to this small town and what it ultimately means. Um, what else? What other scenes kind of hit you as you were going through this?
Well, I do wanna talk a little bit about that scene because I read a little bit about how he filmed it because I found it really incredible just from a filmmaking standpoint because it's a really long take, and the way he set it up is that he has 2 cameras that were just set up in the room, and then he just ran it like a play. And
Mm,
so he ran it 10 times over 2 days, so it was basically like they did a play 10 times over 2 days, and they would just record it as they were going, and so he was able to get the really, like, perfect pacing that you get in a play in that scene, and it's you can really tell. I think it's an expert level shot, and I do think that also you learn a lot about Japanese culture in that scene, which I think is really cool. Just the way that, people are respectful even when they're upset, and you see the, humility that kind of goes between the 2 groups and especially from the people from Tokyo, how they kind of learn humility as they're going and watching them kind of realize what they don't know and realize the position they've been put in is really fascinating, and I found that scene to be absolutely incredible. The other scene that I wanna talk about is the ending, but should we wait? How do you wanna do this? Do you wanna wait to talk about the ending? Because it's a lot, and I have a lot of questions about it.
let's hold off getting into the ending because I think what you talked about there from a respect standpoint actually kind of pulls us into another conversation here, just broader about the movie. You talk about respect. I thought one part of that scene in the community center that was really, really fascinating to me was there's a woman who stands up who shares her story that she moved to this community a couple of years
Yeah.
prior. She had a soba stand in Tokyo, and she moved here, started to use the local water, started to realize how much better her soba noodles were, and when she received compliments from people in town, she realized how proud they were to live in a place where the water is as pure as it is. And you got this sense of a character who, I think this goes even beyond like Japanese culture, but a character who understands how tenuous humans living within nature tends to be. In this sense that if I'm benefiting from this, like that's essential to my business, but also what I'm benefiting from has to go back into the community. And there's a very cyclical aspect here that what these people continue to realize in this meeting and continue to point out is that the glamping company is not going to do anything beneficial for them. The people aren't going to really spend money in town. The people aren't going to really engage in the local community. They're literally just going there to kind of hang out, shed off some stress and some nerves, all of which is, I think, acceptable and fine. And like, something that people who live in the, live and work in a place like Tokyo deserve the opportunity to do that. But what is the impact of that? And is this the right place for you to do that? I think also, and this gets into kind of the back and forth between the two main characters from the PR company, Taka Takahashi and Mayuzumi, is this sense of like, am I living the right life? And I think that this is kind of a larger question that tends to come up in a lot of films, and I think it's really nicely addressed here. Um, these are 2 people that clearly have a job because they need a job. They don't really like their job, but you have to have a job to live and work the way that you do. Um, they both seem a little bit lost in life. Neither are, neither are families. They're living amidst, millions and millions of people in Tokyo. Um, Takahashi has started a online dating account so that he can meet someone. They talk a little bit about that and what that means for them. And then when they get to the town, this is their second time coming through there, they both have this kind of very different but similar awakenings about how difficult it is to live and work amongst nature. I think if we talk about this will help to set up the ending really nicely. But there's a couple scenes in particular, one of which they pull up on Takumi's property while he is chopping wood, and Takahashi asks if he can try to. And the first time he goes to cut wood, the axe just kind of sinks into the block of wood. He's got to do that awkward thing where you kind of pull it out, and then he's got to. Then he learns from Takahashi or from Takumi how to actually chop the wood and what the motion should be and what he should be focused on. I mean, you could basically equate it to hitting a baseball, where you just have to keep your eye on. You have to really feel it. Let the axe kind of swing through. Um, you know, and the experience he has when he ends up cutting one piece of wood is this, like, it's like a high, it's almost like an ecstasy for him, that he realizes, oh my god, I can do this. I'm connected to nature in a really simple but significant way. um how do i how do I get more of this, because this is what feels right. On the other side, you have Maizumi's character. She seems to be more, from my perspective, kind of overwhelmed with the natural world, and she seems respectful of it, but it does not seem by any means like she's ready to uproot and move to this community and change her entire life around. It almost seems like, from her perspective, she recognizes the ignorance that they came into this community with, and she develops all this respect for this community, while realizing that this is a lot more than I bargained for, and this is a lot more than the company has bargained for, because we could actually put a real dent in and really, tear this community apart if our company goes in. There's a real chance of that. I'm curious your thoughts on both of those characters and kind of the journey that the two of them went through during the kind of middle part of the film.
I was really glad that he chose to spend time with them because I think if he hadn't, the film might have felt a little hollow just because his main character, who I'm excited to talk about later, Takumi, is amazing, but he's so quiet and introverted.
Mm.
And so I think you do need something that's a little bit more dynamic, kind of to bounce off of that and to kind of just oppose that. And I thought these two did a great job of that. I found Takahashi's character to be a little frustrating at times just because I think he was less respectful and less sensitive to the townspeople, and then he was also ready to be like, "Yeah, this is my new life. This is what I love now because I've done this, swung an axe once successfully." But I really loved, her character, and I thought seeing her kind of struggle, it was nice to see when she was trying to carry the water back, when you realize how heavy it was because Takumi and his friend that he works with, or not, I don't think he works with him, but the other man that was helping him bring the water to the noodle shop, you see them carrying it and it looks easy. And then when she's doing it, it looks really hard. And you kind of realize like how taxing this life is.
Yeah.
And she also gets hurt later when they're looking for the daughter when she's missing. And she, I think, is supposed to represent that kind of, yeah, this person who comes to a place they're very not they're very out of their element and things are harder for them and they can get hurt easily and they have good intentions, but it's they're overwhelmed by it, almost like the natural world is too much for them. It's too hard for them. And I thought that was really smart the way that he kind of put that in there. And I really also enjoy any scene that Takumi was kind of put up against someone who's very different from him because he has such a solid and kind of stately and very settled sense. What an amazing actor. He was not an actor before this, which is so fascinating. I was reading that he was worked in production on these films, and then they were
Mm.
driving around doing, um, like, looking for locations, and when they were doing that, they would have him just come stand in the shot to kind of get an idea of what it might look for, and then Hamaguchi realized that he has this incredible face and that he is really interesting. And there's so much behind his eyes. He's one of those actors that you really believe with. And I really think that Hamaguchi does an amazing job in this film working with his actors. And I'd love to know more about his process. I read a little bit about it because he gets a lot of authenticity from his actors. Like they don't feel like they're acting, and the fact that they're not professionals makes it even more incredible. He must make them feel very comfortable, which is incredible.
Yeah, there's a small scene midway through the movie. I think it's right after the community meeting where Takumi is um, back home in essentially a cabin, um, lying on the floor. His daughter's right there with him, and he's drawing this picture of um, Takahashi and Mayuzumi, and out of their mouths are coming all of this sewage, and it's coming downhill, and as he's drawing this, his daughter's asking him questions, and she's feeding him like little snacks, and it looks like it's, this is the evening activity, and it's very peaceful, it's very quiet, and he kind of responds to her. And your point about his eyes, like, one of the camera just stops on his eyes as he's drawing and eating and responding to his daughter, and it's all done very slowly. Probably takes 45 seconds to a minute. It's one of those shots that would probably be cast off by a different director, or kind of, just a quick shot and then move forward. That you really sit with him as a relatively accomplished amateur drawer who is still paying attention to his daughter, who doesn't need like a full meal. He just kind of needs a snack to keep him going. Like, there's just a lot of layers to it. And without his mannerisms, without his pace, without his face, um, which is kind of boyish, but kind of like ageless, and kind of this old wise man. There's a clear sense as he is being built up throughout the movie that anyone who kind of needs anything works with him, and as a result, he doesn't necessarily need to have like a full-time gig. He survives because he is useful, and in a place like that, if you are useful, you are essential, and if you are not useful, you're just essentially a burden. um, and you get that with Takahashi. And
Yeah.
I feel almost like, one question I always ask in these episodes is like, what characters did you relate to? I can't help it but, like, relate to Takahashi. You want to relate to Takumi. You want to be, one with nature. You want to be respectful of the land around you. But living in an urban environment, having the creature comforts that I have, not being as exposed to nature as I probably should be based on my love for it, there's clearly a sense in my own head of, when you have this unique, special experience in nature, you kind of inherently say to yourself, well, I could do this. If I just change this about my life, oh, maybe this isn't all going the way that I want it to. Why don't I just move to a rural town and try to, fit in with the locals and put myself in a position where I'm able to, like, just kind of experience life as is and always have a project and always be tinkering. But at the end of the day, if you're coming here for any reason other than, I am fully giving myself over to the natural world and I will work within it and I will take the hits and take the punches, but know that, over time I will start to understand what it means to live in this environment. Unless you're fully willing to do that on a day by day basis, which is very hard for anyone coming from kind of the modern world, you end up needing other people to do things for you, and those other people need that time to do things for themselves, and so you're just ultimately a burden on them in a lot of ways. And so you really get that sense watching Takahashi that if you don't know how to survive a night on your own in the woods, and yet you want to live there, you're just kind of doing something detrimental to the community around you.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. I have repeated fantasies of moving out of the city and living in the woods and needing little and simplifying my life, and I totally related to that with Takahashi's feelings about that, and you realize how hard that is. Um, I came up to the mountains a couple weeks ago, and our lawnmower had broke, and the whole entire front yard, it's kind of at the top of a mountain, was about to be eaten. Like, all of the wildflowers and the grass was 3 feet tall, and it felt like it was going to, like, eat the house, and you realize that we are constantly, like, battling nature here, and it takes so much work, and you realize, yeah, to live in an environment like this is so peaceful and is so beautiful and so slow in some ways, but it's also really laborious and challenging in different ways, and, ultimately beautiful. I really liked how he changes his pace so dramatically when he's filming those scenes, especially like in relation to this scene that he filmed when they're telling their boss that they don't think it's a good idea. Like, they're telling them what the townspeople have said. Do you remember that scene? It's really interesting, that scene, because he's on it like a big projected screen and they're watching on their laptops. And then there's also a picture behind in the kind of office setup space. It's obviously some sort of just set up kind of on the fly, and there's a picture, a painting of a man with his hand, like, on his face, on his chin, and then the character is sitting like that, and it's just a really interesting moment of, framing that he does, but that whole scene, how it's these screens against these other screens, and this, like, really large person projected on there who's clearly not paying attention and not really caring what they're saying, and they're trying to come with him with their real issues, and it's one of those disjointed things where they don't know where to look. Like, are they looking into the camera? Are they looking at the projector? Who are they talking to? And that whole scene has such a disjointed, kind of shitty technical feeling to it, which is in such sharp contrast to, like, the scene that you're talking about with Takumi, like, in his cabin in this, like, dark, warm, soft, slow pace. It's pretty cool.
It reminds me, like, that scene, I'm so glad that they have that in there because, like, I think I as I've gotten older, I've definitely gotten more cynical, but also recognize kind of what focus needs to happen to make sure things that you want from, like, a lifestyle standpoint, but also, like, a large scale, like, political standpoint, what kind of focus needs to be implemented to succeed in that sort of way. And leaving the community meeting scene, you really get a sense that, like, these people have been heard. But you kinda know instinctively, like, well, they have to still convince their boss who's not here, and the reason their boss is not here is because this is you're getting paid less than me. Your job is to go convince these people and then come back and tell me, "Is there anything that we need to do to sweeten the deal so that we can just move forward with this project?" And it reminded me of one of my first jobs out of college was I worked for a company that sent students overseas for internships, and so it was like a half study abroad, half internship experience, and I did it because I had these amazing experiences traveling. I had amazing experiences traveling while working, and I really wanted to facilitate that for young people. I thought it was a huge opportunity for someone to take a step forward in their life, and what you realize very quickly is like, well, the company needs to make money, and so it needs to have a certain amount of students. We have to hit a quota, to make sure that we have all these students who are on the trip, so that we can book the housing and we can book all the events. Blah 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 blah. And you would get in these conversations with students who would suddenly have questions. And it's like, you're selling anything. Like anyone you're selling to, they ultimately are going to have questions for you that you can't necessarily give them the straight honest answer, because in some cases you don't know, but in other cases, like, well, we are a business and we have to function, and you as a person engaging in this business are going to take a like, we can't promise you eternal happiness when you do this. And these type of experiential companies like this glamping company need to cut a few corners to make sure that they make a profit. Um, And I bring this up because I remember having conversations with my boss at the time about like, well, this student is looking for this, or they're having issues with this. And his response always was like, okay, well, how can you get a yes? How do you get to a yes? How do you get this person to just sign, put down the deposit and go? And it was a great learning lesson for me in terms of communication and persuasion and um, understanding like you just can't make everybody happy. And I have a job to do. You are trying to use our product. I can give you a certain sense of, you know, security, certain sense of understanding, but at the end of the day, you can come in with a kind of an emotional argument, and your boss is gonna be like, We have to just you have to this person has to join if they're going like, they're taking up your time, now they're taking up my time, they have to just become a
Yeah.
customer." And you really get the sense in the scene of, like, the boss is listening to them, he's hearing them out, but at a certain point, he comes to the solution of, "Well, let's make Takumi the caregiver essentially of the site. He will oversee the site because he seems to know what to do. He seems to be the leader. He can be your conduit. He's the only person that you guys will then talk to as the site is being built out, as it's being run. So that's number one. But also, like, we can't solve the problem of the sewage because we're going to go over budget. And so they're just going to have to deal with this. So you have to give them something to make sure that they're somewhat happy and feel somewhat heard. And it's just a great snapshot of these companies in urban areas that, like, the ultimate goal of this company is to get people into nature. But to do that, it has to turn a profit. And so to do that, it has to ultimately work against the natural environment. And so on the one hand, this company can provide a ton of opportunities for wealthy young people to have great Instagram pictures and, wake up in nature and feel the positive things that you get from being around nature. But the impact of this company is actually going to be detrimental on this community. But the company can't think about it. Right now is the time that we have to make the profit. So we have to move forward. It's just an amazing dichotomy between like this sense of realization that Takahashi and, I can't remember keep remembering her name, Mayuzumi, get when they're in, the rural environment, um, and then the realities of the job that's great. We just have to move forward, regardless, like, and you mentioned the screens, like, it's a great juxtaposition from, like, this very natural environment to one that is incredibly digital, and symbolically, I think it says so much about, what is trying to ultimately, be said here, by Hamaguchi in this movie.
Yeah, that haven't we all been in a moment when our boss says, like, immediately you can tell they think they have, like, the best idea? Like, that was so captured perfectly. He's like, "Oh, we're just gonna make him the caretaker," and it's like, you can just see on his face, he's like, "This is genius. This is shutting this down. This is done." Like, we've all been there and you're like, it's just not gonna work, and you're like, "Alright, great. Yep." Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, I'll take it. All right, let's shift to the ending. So, for anyone listening right now or watching, thank you all so much. I appreciate it. We did get one comment that the last fish show was straight fire. We will be talking about that on Monday. So thank you for coming to listen to us talk about Evil Does Not Exist. Um, Nate Bordash says he needs to get reminders for the show. Such a good one. Much love from Apollo Beach. Thank you for hanging
Oh,
with us,
that's so
Nate.
nice.
Our eternal superfan VT to boot is currently moving stones on a farm in Vermont. He's coming in and out of service as he's
That's a
watching,
dream.
which is just the perfect environment to be. So if you are watching, if you are listening, and you have not seen this movie and you're intrigued to this point in time, I would encourage you to pause, go watch the movie. It's not very long. It's like an hour, 40 minutes. It moves slow, but like it's over relatively quickly, especially once it gets moving. Um, because the ending, there's a lot to dig into here. So let me do a quick synopsis of the ending. So, one of the eternal themes of this movie is that there are gunshots being heard throughout the environment, and Takumi tells Takashi and Mayuzami that these are hunters killing deer. That there's a lot of deer in the area, so that they're starting to take down the population. Um, And so this is important because Takumi has been kind of catering to Takahashi and Miyazami. They come back to the community, um, which is Mitsu, Mitsubiki. That's the name of the town. They come back. They're essentially going to offer him the job of caretaker. um, he essentially takes them on a tour of town, takes them to the soba noodle shop, takes them to fetch water, where they really see what it takes to get fresh water and clean water to the restaurants and throughout the community. And they're driving around. They hear a gunshot. He goes to pick up his daughter at school. One of the cool things about this is there's such a pathway between the school and his home through the woods, and it's clear that he walks his daughter through the woods all the time, so much to the point that she has become comfortable walking through the woods by herself and understanding nature on a larger level. Um, and he goes to pick her up at school, and she's no longer there. And this is not really a moment of panic yet because uh, she knows her way around the community. There's a very trusting, welcoming community. But it concludes when they realize that she has gone missing. And at this point in time, the village starts to search for Hannah, Takumi's daughter, and they search through the night. And the movie ultimately concludes in like a 5 minute scene that I want to hear your thoughts on. There's theories. It's crazy.
So
Uh,
much to discuss.
There's a lot. So Takumi and Takashi venture into the forest looking for Hana. They eventually emerge into an open field. In the field, you see in the distance Hana approaching a deer and her calf, the latter of which has been shot by a gun. Before Takashi can run over, so Takashi then goes to run to her to try to save her. And at this point in time, Takumi tackles him to the ground and chokes him unconscious. And you think that he may have killed him at this point in time. And from there, Takumi sees Hannah lying motionless in a field with a bloody nose before Takumi picks her up and runs off into the forest. Uh, the film then concludes with Takahashi. He wakes up. He struggles to get up. He's choking. I'm sure his throat is inflamed and windpipe cracked, all this sort of stuff, only to keep falling down. And we start to hear footsteps and labored breathing as the forest fades ultimately into darkness. Now, I've done a lot
And
of,
wait, there's that one shot though when Takahashi's body just falls into the scene. Like it's just the white kind of snow, and you just see his body like lurch forward and fall on the ground. It's so
yes,
intense. It's so
very
intense.
intense. So I've read a lot about theories of the ending because it's not explained in any way. There are moments where, like, the camera, which has been slowly moving with the characters and in nature for the first hour and 35 minutes, suddenly starts kind of like you get these kind of quick shots. You get one of the deer, you get one of the other deer, you get one of the gunshot wound, you get one of Hannah, and it just seems to kind of be this like back and forth, and you don't exactly know where you're at from a time standpoint. And did some of these shots happen in the past? And this is Takumi thinking about it, or are these happening right now in front of them? It's I think deliberately meant to create conversations like this post viewing. But let's kind of just start with it. What were your takeaways from the ending, and what do you think it says about the movie at large?
The first time I watched it, I had no idea what was going on because I felt like up until that point, it was very realistic and narrative. And all of a sudden, I felt like it went dreamlike. And I wasn't sure if it was reality, if it was a dream, if it was some sort of, I don't know, I just didn't understand. I thought the tone was different and I couldn't figure it out. But then after thinking about it, I watched it the second time and I realized that I think that he's really talking a lot about this idea that like life doesn't always have a resolution
Mm,
and that you get to kind of figure out what happens. I have questions about what the characters did in those moments that I want to talk to you about, but I do think it speaks to a larger theme of the movie that like life is inconclusive and subtle and sometimes confusing, and it really takes place in those small moments, and I feel like that's why he uses so much of the filming things really slowly and concentrating on small motions, like showing him lighting a cigarette or walking through the woods or chopping wood. That wood chopping scene, the first time he chops, it's really long. It's a few minutes long. And I think he's really talking about that this is where life exists in these small moments, and that there is, yeah, an unresolved nature to life. And it doesn't always make sense to us. That's what I've kind of decided thematically. I have a lot of questions about technically what's happening, but I want to hear what you think thematically is going on in the ending before we talk about kind of the details.
Yeah. I think ultimately it is a message of um, there's a lack of emotion in nature. It just exists.
Mm,
And it, like, a character like Hannah is born in and lives in, is being raised in the natural world. Um, it doesn't make any sense that she would be killed. It doesn't make any sense that she would be hurt or maimed. But, for example, for the deer that are in this area, and just to kind of backpedal really quickly, there's a great moment in the community meeting scene where Takumi spends, like, I don't know, 45 seconds to a minute, an extended period in time within a movie, noting that the people who live here are not from here. They all came here as well,
mhm,
but the difference is that they learned how to live here, and they respect where they live, whereas the people who are coming in from the glamping community are literally just trying to, profit off of this.
mhm.
And I say that because you get this, like, the deer that live there weren't asking for people to come and live there, but people live there, and as a result, there are hunters now that are taking down, they're culling the population. That doesn't make any sense from a natural standpoint. That is a humanistic instinct to figure out how to make nature work around us. And so, to me, what this continuously says is, if you're going to interact with the natural world, if you're going to be a part of the natural world, you have to always kind of be on your guard. You have to always be willing to accept that something unexplainable and awful could happen that you have to deal with to survive. Otherwise, you will not survive in this environment. And I think there's almost this, like, conflict that starts to brew. And I love that you don't get any scenes up until when Takumi tackles Takahashi of, negativity and
Yeah,
argumentation between the two of them. Kind of the one moment you get is when they're finished bringing water back, and Takumi asks Takahashi if he smokes, and he's not just asking him that so he can give him a cigarette. He's asking him that so that Takahashi can give him a cigarette. And then he doesn't allow Takahashi to light his cigarette. He lights his cigarette, but he doesn't light Takahashi's. And there's just a lot of subtle, like,
yeah,
sizing each other up almost moments, and you really realize kind of there's a pathetic nature to Takahashi, even though he has accepted the pathetic nature to him, and he is trying to overcome that, and he is trying to, um, he's had this kind of awakening moment, and he wants to live within nature. There's kind of a sizing each other up, and a reality that, like, Takumi can live here, you can't. You are not. You are going to be um, a detriment to this community no matter what. And then you get to the end, and there's almost this sense of, like, whatever they see, Takahashi wants to solve the problem right now. He wants
yes,
to he wants to be the person to step in and say, I've got your daughter. And Takumi realizes nature has nature has reclaimed this. I'm gonna have to deal with this as a father, as a person, but nature has stepped in, and it's not your role now to save my daughter. It's not your role to help this situation in a situation in any way. This situation only exists because you came back here trying to court me for a job that I don't want, for a project that my community doesn't want. You are the entire reason right now that my daughter is killed. there's it almost like it kind of harkens back to the title, Evil Does Not Exist.
Yeah.
Takahashi's not acting in an evil manner, but his actions have evil consequences.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that title. That's I think that's it's like intent versus impact in a way. And I think it's interesting because the title, I took it to mean that evil doesn't exist in the natural world, that there's violence that happens in the natural world, but there's no malintent.
You right, exactly.
It's
This is
never a
just
place,
yeah.
right, that is out to get you or does anything bad. That is a
If you get
human
attacked by a grizzly bear, it's not because the grizzly bear hates you, it's because the grizzly bear came across you and you did something or you had something that it naturally wanted and now you're dead.
Yes, and I think there's a moment when he realizes Takumi realizes that his daughter is having this moment with the deer, and I've had a really similar moment with an animal in nature, and it was so shocking and incredible. It was up here in the mountains in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, and we have a really healthy ecosystem, and there are a lot of bears here, black bears. And, black bears are different than grizzlies. Obviously, they don't attack unless, they're scared. But there was a bear that I saw about 5 feet from me when I was walking my dog, like, up in the woods, and then I saw the bear again about 200 yards down from my driveway, like, a week later. And then about 3 weeks after that, I was walking around a pond at the bottom of the property, and across the other end of the pond was this bear. And it both times when I had seen it in the woods, we weren't facing each other, and this time we were facing each other. We were looking at each other. And I
Mm.
looked at this bear, like, in the bear's eyes, and it was far away, but I could tell it was looking at me, and I was looking at it, and it was so incredible to be kind of in a space with a wild animal that could hurt you, but is just as scared of you as you are of them, and have that moment. And I was thinking about that a lot when I watched the movie because it felt to me like Takumi wanted his daughter to have that moment with the deer. Like, he didn't wanna interfere with that, and I was confused a little bit about that. Like, is it because he wants her to be like you were saying, like, that nature's kind of taken this moment and this is what's happening now? Or is it because he realizes that this is pretty sacred? I mean, when I was having that moment, it felt very almost religious, and I think that for people that respect the land that much, there must be some sort of deference paid to the natural world like that. And so I thought that maybe he felt like she was having a moment with that animal, and that was something that Takahashi was about to ruin by going in and doing some weird, big, dramatic thing. And so that's what Takumi was trying to prevent. What do you think about that?
I think that that's I definitely think that that's a possibility. I mean, I think that the way it's filmed is allows for a lot of different interpretations. One of the sites that I was reading was essentially that like what they saw with their own eyes in the moment was Hannah laying there and the deer there. And so the idea was that the deer attacked because the deer felt scared after being shot and it was close to Hannah. And so what you're actually then seeing of Hannah standing up, looking at the deer and Takumi, recognizing it was like a figment of his imagination, like what he in his head thinks is
Oh,
what was happening, which is why the camera then moves so strange. But I don't know. I mean, I think that it's one of those. I think that the way that the movie ends allows for you after having this experience where this is definitely one of those movies that like not only is it completely in Japanese, so you have to pay attention to the closed captioning, but also the way that it is paced. Um, you have to pay attention as things are happening, as things are moving. Otherwise, you'll like everything is so subtle. I mean, there's one scene where um, what is her name? I keep forgetting her name. I'm so sorry.
Mayazumi?
Mayuzumi gets cut by a thorn, and it's a pretty deep cut, and they have to then abandon the search for Hannah and go back so that Takumi can wrap her hand, and then she stays while they go back out. Like even that I think would go over someone's head if you're just, like, on your phone while watching this, and that to me is, like, just another addition in this movie of you don't know what the fuck you're doing out here, and yet you're trying to help, but you're trying to help by not actually by actually making it harder for other people, and so I say all that because, like, by the time you get to the end and the camera starts moving and you start kind of having this relationship with time and violence and the natural world that you have not necessarily had before in the movie, there's a lot of interpretation that can be built up in this. My ultimate takeaway when watching it was that Takumi realized if this guy is able to continue quote unquote helping in our community, he's never going to go away and he's going to create problems for everyone. Like it's almost like you mentioned like nature is not necessarily evil, it can be violent. The runt of a of a herd of animals tends to be killed because all that runt is going to do is need things from people, put people in a position where they or put animals in a position where they have to go out of their own way to provide for an animal that can't necessarily support the herd, cannot necessarily support the group of animals that it's with. And there's almost a sense of like Takahashi is the runt here, and he is well intentioned, but his good intentions are actually they're actually negative. They're actually going to harm the community. They're going to force the community to live outside of its values, and so it almost puts him in a position of my daughter's now dead because of what happened, because of the fact that you people are invading our space and are trying to, um, take me away from the life that I am trying to live. You're going to give me a job that does not allow me to make sure that the community runs the way that it needs to run. So that then I have more work to do for other people who don't actually give a shit about the community whatsoever. And so I just have to end this here and now. Um, and then there's this sense, as the movie's ending of like this guy who does not know how to and cannot survive in nature being engulfed by nature all around us.
Yeah, I love that scene when he kind of, like, lurches on, it's really intense. It's really interesting thinking about viewing the scene with the idea or the framing that she's already dead when he gets there. Because I didn't think that at all, and it's interesting because it does change it quite a bit as to why he would choke him if he already felt like she was already dead or hurt. Because the whole time when it's happening, you're kind of wondering, why isn't Takumi going to save her, or why isn't he worried about her in the way that Takahashi is?
Yeah, and there's a sense almost of like he just accepts immediately what has happened and
Yeah.
that nature has taken over. And how would he get mad at the natural world when the reason why this happened is because of a person, an ignorant person who doesn't actually know. I mean, there's like a great moment when they're driving around where they're talking about deer and they're asking, can deer attack people? No, deer only attack people if they feel threatened. Um, and one of the characters asks, well, can't we just build a fence so that, the deer can't attack the people, but they can approach the fence and the people can interact with the deer? And Takumi's his response is, well, if they touch the deer, there's diseases that the deer carry, so those people are going to get diseases. Um, and like, it's such a small moment, but again, it's like a reinforcement that like you don't have any idea what every step that you take in this world will ultimately lead to. And if you don't have any idea of what every step in this world is going to lead to, you have no business starting a business here and trying to profit off of this. Um, there's a lot. I mean, I'd be curious for anyone who has seen this, who's in the chat, if you have theories about the ending, please type them into the chat and we will share them here. But
It's a cool
I j-
ending. I think anything that gets you talking like this and gets you questioning and has multiple kind of ways to define the ending is always good. Although I'm not really sure like what his perspective on it was. Like Hamaguchi, I'm not sure what he wanted to convey with it. I'm unsure, which I think is also okay.
I mean, I think it whatever it is, it fits with the larger theme movie because like the most emotional moment is when Takumi attacks Takahashi, and aside from the one character in the community meeting who's sitting up front who tries to fight Takahashi, there's really no emotion that people show. The people are
None.
very rational in a way that I think speaks to like how you have to survive in nature. It's also interesting to me because so this is our third episode of Blockbuster Card. Um, we've now I've just realizing this had three very distinct endings in our movies. The
Yeah,
first one,
you're right.
the player has a very, very specific ending where everything is tied up in a bow. There's
Super
even
bow,
a
yeah.
the end, at the end of it. It kind of mocks and winks at, the way that Hollywood movies have always ended with everyone, okay, everyone's lives are now great and you can move on with your life. The apartment, uh, brought the two main characters together, but doesn't give you a sense of closure of like, did they end up together? It just, let's play cards and we'll see where things go from here. This one is much more ambiguous. And I think that that just
Mhm.
speaks to the relationship of what it's like to actually live amongst nature. Um, I want to ask you. So again, this is our third movie that we've talked about. The first one was from 1992. Second one was from 1960. This is our most recent movie that we've talked about. This came out. So it was made in 2023. This came out in 2024. I think we'll probably end up talking about this to a certain degree at the end of this year, as we look back on the start of a new show and kind of where we're at with movies at this point in time, kind of big picture wise. But I'm curious right now, what does this movie say to you about movies in the 2020s?
It's pretty exciting for me because I think there's a real openness to creative and independent films now in a way that's really exciting. He really he had a big hit with Drive My Car, which I have not seen, which is definitely on my list. I need to see that very soon. I really want to. But I think he was probably given some opportunity after that, and I think it's really incredible that he has this really big film, and then he goes and makes something really outside of the box and something really creative, and like I talked about at the beginning of the episode, something that came organically from his relationship and collaboration with another artist. That is if that's not where I want, like, an art industry to be, I don't know what is. That's to me what art should be. It should be a place where people can be really creative and take big risks and do things in collaboration with other artists. I think that's really exciting, and so glad movies like this are getting made and getting shown and getting brought to America because this is seeing a Japanese film like this is such a window into a totally different culture in a way that I really enjoy and appreciate.
Yeah, and this is I would advocate highly for a Criterion subscription because this movie is
Yeah.
on Criterion. I think it will be there for a long time to come. This was one of their exclusive premieres from theaters. There's another one that are we gonna talk about it this year? I'm just trying to see. Yes, we're gonna talk about another one of these in December. We already have so much of the series planned out. Um, uh, that was another one of these, brought to Criterion by way of international film. The international cinema scene and how it has reached America is so different than what it was even 10, 15 years ago. And you used to get just kind of one-off movies here and there in theaters that made a splash overseas, and then they would make something of a splash here in America. Now, there's much more access, and I think it's just endlessly fascinating that a movie like this that combines a lot of technical wizardry within the way the camera moves and the way the camera operates throughout the movie, um, and the way that the music interacts with the movie, um, with a story that feels pretty timeless. It feels like it could have come out 50, 60, 70 years ago. And so you have kind of this ability. It's almost like where at its best modern music is, where there's an amalgamation of styles. We haven't crossed this kind of Rubicon that we crossed in the, you know, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s from a technical standpoint where new advancements allowed music to be heard differently, and now we're continue to experiment off of those ideas. Um, there hasn't been anything, a technical breakthrough that has completely changed the paradigm. And I think we're still kind of there with movies. I think that one of the things that fascinates me so much about movies right now and in this decade is that you get movies that feel like they could have, you know, you could break apart chunks of them to come from various decades. And so from a thematic standpoint, there's just a lot of I don't know, there's just a lot of experimentation while also within this movie specifically kind of an ode to the peace, the tranquility, the quiet, um, the overall kind of contemplative nature that you need to have to live amongst nature like this. This movie really hammers that home in a symbolic way, and I think that that's maybe not easier to do now in movies, but it's more fitting because, um, there's such a variety of movies that can be made that you have, viewers that are just very open to a lot of different approaches. Um,
I
so
hadn't thought about that. I think you're right, and I think the access to film from so many different eras is really impactful now. I hadn't thought about that. I think you're right.
it's fun stuff. This was a fascinating movie. I cannot recommend this enough. Are there any other movies that this reminded you of at large?
Yeah, I had one that's kind of interesting that I thought about. The 2023, also similar time, the French thriller from Justine Triet, Anatomy of a Fall.
Mm, mm,
That movie is similar in the sense that there's a very ambiguous ending and open for interpretation. There's sort of an eerie, somber quality to that movie. You're not really sure what people's underlying motives are. It's different. It's a thriller, but it's has also a very evocative setting that's very specific in the same way that this film does. So that was one that reminded me of. And also, I've been watching a lot of Terrence Malick films lately.
mm,
They have a lot of unresolved feeling in them. Sometimes I don't love that, but he has absolutely breathtaking cinematography. So Days of Heaven, it takes place in the Midwest in the wheat fields, and some of the most gorgeous, beautiful, epic shots of that part of the country that I haven't really seen before. So I would highly recommend that. Just for the visuals, that movie is totally worth it. It's kind of a weird movie. It's sort of flawed, I think, but beautiful and kind of dreamy in the same way that this movie is dreamy.
it's funny because I have a Malik movie as well. I have 2, that have nothing to do with the subject matter of this, but ultimately connect with me on this, one of which, the Malik movie is The Thin Red Line, which I just
Mm.
watched last month for the first time maybe ever. I feel like I'd seen it around the time it came out, but, that's a movie that follows, US soldiers as they land in Guadalcanal and as they experience the Battle of Guadalcanal, which is a really brutal early battle in World War II, that helped the US to march up the islands towards Japan. And that movie does an incredible job of giving you a sense of what it feels like to be approaching a ridge in a completely foreign land, knowing that the enemy is somewhere on the other side, and what that tension feels like. Um, the moments of absolute, like, stunning beauty in a literal tropical paradise that you are battling against for the future of the world. Um, it it shies away from the, you know, larger than life camaraderie of going to war and instead focuses much more on um kind of the quiet moments and the uncertainty and the total fear that people have in that environment, even when, in hindsight they're revered as heroes. um
God, I wanna watch that movie again. I have to say too, when I hear you talk about those kinds of movies or when I think about them, I'm just completely in awe that real people went through that. Like,
mhm,
I think it
mhm.
that sounds really stupid to say, but there's just such a foreignness to the kind of grand sacrifice and huge Like you were saying, it was such an important part of history, and it's crazy that people actually lived that, and I'm so glad that people make movies about it. I wanna watch that movie again. I haven't seen it since it came out.
A lot of really bad movies about war, but a lot of movies that, when it's done right, you can really show the complexity, the boredom, the beauty, the fear, the pride that you have, but also that pride being mixed with additional fear because you're just gonna have to do this again. You know, if you're successful at going into battle and you survive, you're gonna probably go into battle again. And so like that sort of psychological experience, that movie gets very dreamy. The other one is my favorite movie I've watched in 2025. It is not a 2025 film, but is Wings of Desire, which is a Wim Wenders
Mm,
film,
so good.
which is unbelievable. Not at all set in nature. It is angels visit Berlin and interact with people within the city of Berlin. And one of the angels ends up falling in love with a human, and what happens in that sort of experience. And I had just like a really, really powerful time watching that movie this year. It's the first time I'd seen it since college, and it just hit me on a completely different level. And the way that you move through the world is kind of similar to this, where you feel less rooted on the ground and more kind of drifting through this environment, and its ending is just as impactful, just as powerful.
Yeah, I
All right,
love
so
that, that's a really great comp because of the sweeping nature of the way that it's filmed. It has a very, like, the camera's floating a lot, and it kind of zooms out and in a way that's very similar. I like that.
it's amazing stuff. So as always, we'll compare our ratings here for this movie to Letterboxd. If you are not on Letterboxd and you are hanging out here with us on Blockbuster Card, go ahead, get yourself an account. Give us each a follow. We are trying to build a collection of movies to talk about with people at large. So the average rating for this movie is 3.8 stars. So just about 4 stars. Meg, where did you give this movie?
I also gave it 4 stars, and I gave it 4 stars because, to me, I think there could be a little bit of a stronger through line in terms of theme and what he's trying to say. He actually admits to not really having a message that he's trying to convey in this film in interviews and stuff, and I'm torn because of how creatively this piece came about. I love the idea of 2 people using what they know about each other as artists and allowing a piece of work to evolve organically out of that collaboration. That's to me what, as someone who used to act, this is like what art is all about to me, is collaboration. But the story ultimately does leave me, like, a little wanting. Talking about you at the ending really helped me process it, but after watching it twice, I still had a lot of questions about it, which is also great, but that's why I gave it 4 stars. What did you give it?
So when I watched this originally back in December, I want to say, I gave it 4.5 stars for many of the same reasons that you just listed. That I felt like it approached a masterpiece with some elements of it kind of left hanging, maybe intentionally, maybe not. But I felt like I walked away being like, for me, a 5 star movie is both this feels organically sprung from the earth and from like creativity and perfectly executed, but also I understand what is trying to be said here. I gave it 5 stars here on my second viewing, and I think ultimately for me, this is a very slow movie. And when I rewatched it, movies take me a couple of days now, just the way of my schedule. Um, but once I sat down last night, I powered through the last 3 quarters of it. I didn't wanna get off the couch. I wanted to watch interviews with Hamaguchi. I wanted to ultimately rewatch it and live within the world again. And the ending kinda hit me in a very different way where I wasn't necessarily as concerned about, "Okay, what does this mean?" versus, like, "What am I feeling while I'm watching this, and how is this impacting me, on a larger scale?" Um and I think, that second viewing of a movie that you really enjoyed the first time kinda, especially so quickly afterwards, it kind of holds the cards of, like, is this actually a great movie, or was it just you had a good experience the first time? It's kind of the game we play with, like, did you just have a good time at the fish show, or was it actually a good fish show? You don't really know until you revisit the tapes. And so,
So true.
that second time through a movie, you really kind of revisit, okay, was this just the way I felt in this moment, or was this actually what the director and the actors were trying to get across? And I thought it was more the latter, and it hit me even harder the second time. Maybe coming out of, a pretty intense natural experience I had a couple weeks ago. So, um, either way, this is a highly rated movie. This is definitely something we recommend you all watch. We wouldn't have spent 90 minutes talking about it if not. Um, any last words you have to say about Evil Does Not Exist? I do want to just really quick before you do that. William Welsh has asked us, have we seen The Tree of Life? I have not seen it since it came out. That is actually a movie that is on my to watch list this summer. He compared this movie to an acid trip, which I remember that. Brad Pitt, Sean Penn, amazing performances. I need to go back and rewatch that. That'll be done this summer.
Yeah, that's on my watch list. I've never seen it. So I'm excited. I'm watching, like, slowly watching all of Malik's films, so I will definitely be getting to it this summer. I really like watching one director's films kind of spaced out, so that's what I'm doing right now with that, and Hamaguchi too. I'm gonna watch Drive My Car. It looks so good.
He's only got like 5 movies, so, you should
Yeah.
be able to watch Malick. He spreads them out over a couple decades, it seems. Um, any last things you want to say about Evil Does Not Exist before we bid sayonara to our devoted listeners?
No, just if you haven't watched it, you really need to spend time with it. The forest is just so beautiful, and it's a movie that makes us slow down, and I need more of those in my life.
It's very true. Very true. So, I feel the same way. Um, Anytime in nature is a good thing, and a lesson like this is a great thing. Um, I so we will be back next week, I believe on Wednesday as
Mhm.
well, and we will be talking about Brief Encounter, which
I
is
love this movie.
me too. This is a very different movie in some cases from what we have talked about so far in this series. This is a movie from, I am pulling it up right now. This is from the 40s, I want to
I think
say,
it's 43 maybe?
1945.
Oh, it's really
Um, it leads with a story of the most precious moments in a woman's life, which I think it's a little bit more than that. That's an interesting way to
It's super
describe this.
romantic. It's kind of like, we talked about it's a little bit like, The Apartment's based inspired by this and, Before Sunrise, so it's romantic. It's the
It's
best.
incredibly romantic. One of the people I follow on Letterboxd reviewed this as like if Lost in Translation was made by a lifelong Protestant. Um, Mm. This is
That's
amazing. This
amazing.
is a really incredible movie, that I'm really excited to rewatch. I haven't watched in a couple of years. I'm really excited to talk about with you. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot to dive into. So we'll be talking about Brief Encounter next week. I just double checked. This is available to watch on Criterion. It's also available to watch on HBO Max, and is available to rent on Apple TV. So if you have not seen Brief Encounter, please go ahead and check that out. It's a shorter movie. I think it's only like 90 minutes. It's 86 minutes long. So you can
Yes,
get this
yes,
taken
please.
care of. This is like a one night movie type of thing. And I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. This kind of gets into areas of where we want to take this show, just in terms of exploring both film history, but also, these very interpersonal stories of kind of what can happen in a life that can throw you off your path. And, what exactly you do when that happens. So I'm very excited to talk about it. I think there's a lot to dig into. I think you all will enjoy it if you have not seen it yet. Until then, check out Evil Does Not Exist. Check out Brief Encounter, and we will see you all next week at the movies.
Bye, everyone.